Hi everyone, my name is Kristen. Welcome to my channel, Kristen is Fully Booked. Today I'm going to be doing a wrap up for all of the books that I read in January. Overall, January was an okay month, I would say. It started out really strong with books that I really loved and enjoyed. In the middle of the month, I started a couple different books that weren't really drawing me in, and I went through a little bit of a reading slump because of that. And then I finished up the month with some books that I had fairly mixed feelings about. In the month of January, I finished a total of 8 books. I have 2 still ongoing, and I DNF'd 1. From the 8 books that I read, the genre breakdown was 4 adult fantasy, 1 fantasy romance, 1 historical romance, and 2 young adult sci-fi books. The 2 books that I still have ongoing from January are The Picture of Dorian Gray, which I have a copy, or I own a copy on my Kobo, and the other one is Robert Jordan's Eye of the World, which I am now about 2/3 of the way through. Since the last time that I mentioned it here, I am enjoying it a lot more, but I'm finding that I enjoy it when I read it in small bursts. I'll start off by talking about the book that I did not finish this month, and that is All the Stars and Teeth by Eidolon Grace. This is a young adult fantasy that is in a sea and island sailing based setting. We follow Princess Aurora, who is supposed to prove her mastery over her family's soul magic in a demonstration to her court. It goes horribly awry, and shortly after this, she discovers that not all is well within the kingdom. She enlists the help of a pirate named Bastion, and they decide that they are the two who are going to fix all of the problems within their kingdom. I was listening to the audio version of this book on the app Scribd. I really just didn't connect with any of the characters. I kind of found them really annoying. The problem that was happening within the world didn't really intrigue me all that much. But ultimately, I couldn't decide if I wasn't enjoying the book because of the content or because of the narration, which I really was not enjoying. I don't ever want to say that I didn't enjoy a book when really what I didn't enjoy was the way that the audio version was narrated. So I've put the audio version down for now, and I've requested a copy of the ebook through my library. So I'm going to try it again in a couple months and give it a fair shake. The first book that I finished in the month of January was Eidolon by Grace Draven. This is a sequel to her novel Radiance, which is in the Wraith Kings series. This sequel explores the relationship when it is put into a situation of having external world pressures and conflict, and how that impacts the relationship and how the two people involved deal with it. I thought it was really enjoyable, and I thought it was very realistic. I really liked this couple and how they came together in the first book, and so I enjoyed seeing more of the sort of what happens after happily ever after component to their relationship. The next book that I finished in the month of January was The Ruin of Kings by Jen Lyons. This is an adult epic fantasy novel that is really wild. It has everything from dragons, demons, witches, and wizards to soul switching, past lives, and gods walking the earth. It has a lot of elements and 3 different sort of confusing timelines that it switches back and forth with. It also has footnotes. It was a wild read, definitely epic, and it's the first in a series. I did do a full review for this book, so if you were interested in hearing more about it, definitely check out that review so you can get a better sense of whether or not this would be the right book for you to pursue. Next up in January, I read Bloodsong by Anthony Ryan. Bloodsong follows the story of Valen, who is given to the military arm of a religious order when he is quite young. It is therefore sort of a military school training setup. It had a lot of action sequences, although I didn't find that they were repetitive. The main character, Valen, is really just a sweetheart. He is one of your stereotypical good characters where he is not only good at everything, a very clear leader, really cares and takes for the people in his group or the people that he cares for. He's also portrayed as being very morally upright, and he tries to make decisions that reflect this. Although, of course, there is some conflict within the world, not only wars happening, but sort of Valen's good intentions being manipulated through blackmail, let's say. I did really like Bloodsong. Valen is just such a lovable character that you can empathize with so much. The next book that I read was The Well of Ascension by Brandon Sanderson. This is the second book in the Mistborn series. The first book is The Final Empire. This setup for this series is what happens if that hero chosen one fails. Brandon Sanderson writes very hard magic systems. In this book, the magic system is called allomancy, that involves swallowing metals that when you burn them gives you a different set of powers depending on the metal. Our main character Vin is a Mistborn, and that is someone who can use all of the metals that can be burned for power to get all of those different powerful traits. I can't say too much about the plot of the second book without doing spoilers for the first book, so I'll just say that this book understandably deals with a lot of the repercussions from what takes place and what falls out in the first book. I liked a lot of the human aspects of this book, despite the fact that the characters are in sort of a tense siege setting or like imminent battle throughout the whole length of the book. It didn't really feel like a siege book. It felt more like an exploration of how these characters are managing in the setting that they are from an individual basis, as well broad terms in terms of how different population groups are dealing with the fallout from the events in the first book. In particular, I liked how we explore sort of one of the characters kind of constantly comparing himself to a leader. From the first book, he's now in a leadership role, and he kind of can't help but constantly compare how himself and how he's managing and doing things, even just his role within the group and how people respect him, and how the other character might have done things differently or would have been perceived or followed better. It also went into a surprising amount of detail and exploration of the relationship, the romantic relationship of two of the characters involved here. I actually wasn't expecting this based on sort of the vibe of the book, although I am someone who does really enjoy when the romance is explored in novels. The two characters are quite young, and they had really realistic thoughts and questions and doubts about this like love setting that they're in. For example, there's a really cute scene where sort of both of them independently go to another older character to get their advice on the relationship, and it's a lot of things like, how do you know if this is the right person? How do you know when you're in love? How do you know if you're the right person for that character? And it just felt really, really genuine and realistic. One of the things that I really like about this series is that while there are definitely conflict and problems that are happening in our current time that are really, really important and that I'm intrigued by and want to keep reading about, it also reflects back a lot on what happened 1,000 years ago and how the events of that situation are impacting the events that they're dealing with right now. The next book that I read was The Governess Game by Tessa Dare, which is a historical romance. This book follows the main character whose financial situation changes at the beginning of the book, and she is forced to take the job of a governess to a bachelor, man of the town rogue who has inherited two orphan girls who are sisters. It is sort of an instant attraction. Oh wait, maybe he's not good for me. Instant attraction develops into things, and then, it's a romance, so there's some love towards the end of the book. Honestly, it was only okay. There was some really cute and hilarious moments with the two little girls, but again, that shouldn't be my favorite part of a romance book, and it was. The next book that I finished was A Dance with Fate by Juliette Marillier. This is the second book in the Warrior Bards trilogy. This is a historical fantasy that is set in Ireland, where the main magical components are fair folk, or like the good folk, and some curses. The series follows three main characters, Lavon, Brock, and Dow, who are warriors who are receiving advanced specialized training by a mercenary group / spy group. Each book has a separate, distinct problem that the group has to overcome, and then there is sort of a magical problem within the world that I think is going to span the length of the series at large. The problem in this book is that Dow loses his vision in a training accident. Because of this, the two have to travel back to his father's home and land, where Levon, who is somewhat responsible for the event, has to work as a bond servant. It was very slow paced. I don't usually have a problem with that, but I have to connect with the characters, and I'm just not really connecting with Levon, Brock, and Dao, even up to this point in the second book in the series. The situation of Dao becoming injured and losing his sight also felt very forced and rushed. It just sort of felt like the author wanted them to be in this situation in his homeland with his vision lost, and did whatever she could to sort of get them there. The writing is very different from Juliette Marillier's other novels, which is usually very whimsical, environmental, and atmospheric. Each chapter is either from Levon's, Brock's, or Dao's point of view, and it's written in first person, but the sentences are very short. The writing is very stilted. It doesn't really feel like you go great into depth with any of the characters. The story was also kind of obvious. I feel like I could have read the synopsis and essentially predicted or told you what the arc of the story was going to be. They start to become sort of suspicious about things that are happening in his father's home, and they'll sort of end a chapter being like, wait, could this be happening? And yes, obviously that is what's happening. Nothing felt like a surprise. I did expect this book to be a lot darker than it was. Content warning, there is some suicide ideation, but I'll say that it just sort of, I didn't feel like we went to the depths that I was expecting to go with Dao, and that let me down a little bit. Overall, I am going to hold off on judgment and a sort of a final recommendation or thought on this series at large until I finish the series. The third book is coming out in September of this year. The next book that I finished was Aurora Rising by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. This is a YA sci-fi series that I kind of picked up spontaneously. Full disclosure, I have seen the cover for this book all over Instagram and wasn't really intrigued until I saw some of the fan art. And then I thought, yeah, I could get into that. So that's how I wound up reading Aurora Rising. This is set in 2380 or something like that, really in the future. The main character, Tyler, is about to graduate from literally Space Academy, but it's called Aurora Academy, and enter into the Aurora Legion, which is described as sort of the galaxy-wide United Nations. The night before the draft, where he gets to pick all of the group members for his squad, he goes out on a sort of just a late night space drive and discovers a spaceship that has been lost in space for 200 years. All of the thousands of people on board are dead except for one teenage girl who's been frozen in cryospace this whole time. Because he is out saving this girl, he ends up missing the draft and is left with all of the leftover people who were not picked by anyone else, a band of misfits. I really like bands of misfits, especially when they're teenagers, because there's that added component of kids who are maybe loners finding a group of people and coming together, and my heart just bleeds for these teenage misfits. These characters just really worked for me, despite the fact that there was a lot of things in this book that really shouldn't have worked for me. I'm not into space and technology. I don't really like overly sarcastic characters who feel like they are written by adults trying to be snarky teenagers. That usually doesn't work for me. The humor was very teenage hormone innuendos, and there's also some weird breaking of the fourth wall that I don't always enjoy. However, despite all of that, I really just loved reading this book. It was such a fun experience. There was action, it was funny, there was really heartbreaking emotional moments. There is a romantic subplot. While I am very tired of the soulmate mate trope, it kind of worked in this setting. I enjoyed the way that it was executed, and I liked where they left off. This book just gave me really big squad goals vibes. We do get a point of view from each of the people in the squad, which helps you to connect a little bit deeper with their backstory. And because I have no willpower, The next and final book that I read in January was Aurora Burning, the next book in this series. I did not feel the same way about this book. The authors make some choices in this book that essentially seem to go back on all of the character work and group development and bonding that they spent so much time and painstakingly developing in the first book and at the beginning of the second book. Particularly, there's one situation where a character makes essentially one mistake and everyone reacts in a way that you do not think they should or would react. That isn't to say that it's not reasonable to expect group bonds to crack and break when there's a lot of external stress and pressures, which is definitely happening in the setting that they are. However, it just didn't feel genuine to the characters involved. The pacing didn't really work for me in this book either. At the beginning, there are a lot of conflict scenes where the authors almost seem to keep upping the ante in the moment. So the group will be in a situation, like a problem that is going not well, and that they already have to overcome, and then suddenly there's even worse things added onto it. And then just when you think it can't get any worse, there's another added problem that happens, and it just kind of keeps piling on until they sort of like secretly slip away and get out of the situation. And that happens several times. It goes through a really long, slow slog throughout the middle of the book. There is a training sequence that, while necessary for the plot, was quite boring. And then, of course, towards the end, it like really ramps up with conflict and climax. There's a lot going on, but by this point, I was kind of just so disappointed and disconnected because of those character things that had happened that I kind of just wanted it to be over. This book kind of let me down. I was definitely, when I read it, I was still sort of on the high from the first book, and it did not live up to my feelings from the first one. I am a completionist, and so I will definitely read the next book. I have no idea when it's coming out. I don't think we know yet, although I didn't really do a deep dive because I was sort of reeling, just like in like a kind of let down what just even happened kind of mood when I finished this book. Well, those are all of the books that I read in the month of January. As I said, it was sort of a mixed month in terms of what I enjoyed. If you have any questions about any of the books or series that I've mentioned here today, feel free to let me know down below. I'd love to provide more information. And if you have also read any of these books, I'd love to hear what you thought about them. That is it for today. Thank you for joining, everyone. We'll see you next time. Bye.